Hello everyone, it's 7 o'clock and the strikes go on. We're facing the worst week of rail disruption for 30 years. The finger-pointing and blame games continue. The strikes are now into their 8th month, and there's a warning this morning that millions of people will simply avoid using the trains in the future. We'll hear from the Transport Secretary Mark Harper in a few minutes' time, followed soon after by the leader of the Rail Workers Union, Mick Lynch. It is Tuesday, the 2nd of January. New year, new strikes, commuters facing the worst week yet on the railways.
I'm live at Euston Station on day 1 of 5 of consecutive rail strikes as 2 unions join forces to put much of the network out of use.
We're live in Kyiv as the Kremlin admits that scores of its soldiers were killed in a Ukrainian rocket attack.
A British couple confirmed among 4 people who died in a mid-air collision on Australia's Gold Coast.
The government is urged to act over warnings. The pressure on the NHS is unbearable and intolerable. The return of face masks, new guidance on return to school says adults feeling unwell should cover up. After 3 days of national mourning, the burial of the Brazilian football legend Pele will take place today in Sao Paulo. It's Veganuary, and if you're going vegan and that's one of your New Year resolutions, we'll hear one expert's tips on making it a tasty challenge. And tribute pays to the child prodigy Earth, Wind & Fire drummer Fred White, who has died at the age of 67. Hello and good morning and a happy new year. It's the first full day of business following the festive break, and commuters are facing 5 consecutive days of travel disruption. Now, ministers fear that millions of passengers will give up on train travel altogether as a result of the worst week of rail disruption in 30 years. Now, it comes as the RMT warns that strikes on the railway will continue until the government stops blocking a deal to resolve the bitter dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Later in the show, we'll be speaking to the Transport Secretary Mark Harper as well as to the boss of the RMT, Mick Lynch. Now, the rail dispute is just one of a number of damaging strikes that the country will face through January. Rail workers will be on strike from today until Friday, and workers on the Elizabeth line through London on the 12th. London bus drivers will walk out on 7 days throughout the month. Highway workers and driving examiners will be on strike in the first week of the new year. Paramedics will walk out on the 11th and 23rd. And nurses will strike again on the 18th and 19th of January. Well, joining me now from Euston Station is our Aisha Zahid. Aisha, good morning to you. So we can see the picket line there has formed. More strike action coming.
Morning, Kamali. Well, we're starting the year just as the last one left off. More strike action on the railways, more widespread disruption. And that's because, as you said, RMT are doing 2 lots of 48-hour walkouts. The first lot taking place from today into tomorrow, and then again on Friday. And then on top of that, the one day during the working week where they're not taking strike action is Thursday. But that's when ASLEF Union, the drivers' union, will be walking out as well. So all of this combined together is going to mean widespread disruption on the railways, limited services and reduced schedules running, and where people are lucky enough to get onto the trains, there are going to be most likely later start times and earlier finishes as well. So the message from train operators is really to check before they head out to see if their trains are running and to account for longer wait times and to only travel if it is absolutely necessary. Now, RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch has said that the government's been sitting on their hands and time again the unions have emphasised they don't want to be taking strike action, but they have to because no one's listening over pay and conditions. In response response, the government said, well, its biggest concern is increasing wages could worsen inflation, but the government say that they've been reasonable and that they're ready to facilitate an end to this rail disruption.
All right, Aisha, for now, thank you for that. And let me just remind you that it's 7:20. I'll be speaking to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper. And then just after that, the General Secretary of the RMT, Mick Lynch, will be joining us. Now, Russia has suffered one of its deadliest attacks since the start of the war in Ukraine. Its defence ministry has admitted that 63 soldiers were killed in a missile strike that destroyed a temporary barracks in eastern Ukraine. Now, Ukraine claims that up to 400 Russian soldiers were actually killed in the strike. Our correspondent Yusra El-Bagir is in Kiev for us this morning. Yusra, good morning to you. Nice to have you with us. So, what do we know about this? The Russians saying it's 63, Ukrainians saying 400. Where are we with this?
As of now, the Ukrainian Armed Forces says they're investigating the number of casualties, but they put out a statement and said that Ukraine launched 13 attacks on areas of concentration of Russian troops in the last 24 hours, and that Russian army had launched 6 missiles, 52 airstrikes, and over 70 multiple launch rocket system attacks. So there is an acknowledgement from the Ukrainian Armed Forces of how many missiles they launched into areas of Russian army concentration, but still trying to investigate the number of casualties. 63 admitted by the Russian Defense Ministry, still a significant figure. It still makes this one of the deadliest attacks in the war so far. People are saying that it's likely to be on the lower end of the scale, but still quite significant. It's important to remember that the Donetsk region does have journalists, does have people there that would make it quite difficult to hide an event with this much loss of life. So this acknowledgement, again, is quite surprising, but still would have to happen. The lack of transparency would be difficult at this time. But we have seen an intensification of aerial attacks over the last week on both sides. Zelensky in his evening address said that Russia would be launching a protracted drone campaign to exhaust Ukraine. And over the last 3 days, we've seen 84 drones at least, according to the Ukrainian Armed Forces, fired into Ukraine, many of them over Kyiv. So as well as the fighting that's happening on the front lines in the south and the east, it's also, there are attacks here in Kyiv, hundreds of kilometers away.
Okay, Yusra, for now, thank you. And the Sky News Daily podcast has a new mini-series to start the year. If you scan that QR code that you see on your screen right now, you can listen to Neil Patson in conversation with the Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik. You can listen and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. Well, still to come on the programme this morning, at 7:20, we'll be speaking to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, on all things strikes. And at past, we'll be hearing from the head of the rail union, the RMT, that's Mick Lynch. At 7:45, I'll speak to the former Health Secretary and former chair of the NHS Confederation, Stephen Dorrell, as the government is urged to act over warnings that the pressure on the NHS is unbearable. And sticking with that, the government has been warned that that pressure on the NHS is becoming quite intolerable and is facing calls to do more to help the service through its winter of crisis. The British Medical Association says that staff are desperately trying to keep up with incredibly high levels of demand, and they've accused the government of failing even to discuss the issues. Well, more than a dozen NHS trusts and ambulance services have declared critical incidents over the festive period. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine says that up to 500 people are dying each week as a result of the delays and problems with urgent and emergency care. A Department of Health and Social Care spokesperson said in response, "We recognise the pressures the NHS is facing following the impact of the pandemic. That's why we've backed the NHS and social care with up to £14.1 billion in additional funding over the next 2 years." The British Medical Association, though, says that the government's political choices were leading to patients dying unnecessarily. Well, Matthew Simpson waited 16 hours and 45 minutes for an ambulance to arrive when his wife, Teresa, fell ill. He blames the delay for her death. hospice health chiefs admit the NHS is facing significant pressure.
100%. I believe that if they got to my wife within the 6 hours, say from 3 till 9 o'clock, my wife would still be here now. She would not be. She wouldn't. I'm 100% that she would still be here today because she would have got the help.
If you look and make international comparisons, you'll find that many health systems, as they're coming out of the pandemic, are seeing higher levels of mortality than you would traditionally expect. So the same is the case in Germany, in Italy, in Spain. I think it probably is fair to say that certainly talking to frontline staff, talking to frontline chief executives, this does feel like it's the most significant degree of pressure that we face.
Now, police in Australia say that a British couple on holiday were among the 4 people who were killed in a mid-air collision between 2 helicopters on the Gold Coast yesterday. Well, let's bring in our Nicole Johnson, who's joining us now live. Nicole, good to have you with us. So what more do we know about this incident on the Gold Coast?
Well, Sky News has received a statement from the family of the British couple, Diane and Ron Hughes. They were both killed in that crash. The family has said that they're heartbroken, that they're still trying to contact family and friends, and that they would like privacy at this devastating time. Let's take a listen to Queensland's Police Commissioner for some more detail on that freak accident.
What we do know at this very early stage of the investigation is that one helicopter was taking off. That's had 7 people on board. Another one coming into land with 6 people on board. Now, they've collided. The one helicopter that was taking off appears its main rotors have collided with the landing helicopter.
That first helicopter took off and collided with the second helicopter, as we just heard. The first helicopter lost all of its blades and its engine. It crashed down around 200 metres. It landed the wrong side up, and as we know, 4 people were killed, including the pilot and an Australian woman who was there on holidays with her 9-year-old son. Another 3 people were injured, 2 of them children. The big question now, though, is how did this happen and what can the officials do to try and make sure that an accident like this never happens again? It was quite remarkable, though, that the helicopter pilot for the second helicopter that was trying to land, he managed to get it to the ground the right side up, even though it was severely damaged and smashed all the glass at the front of that helicopter, and everyone in that helicopter survived with minor injuries. There's now a serious investigation underway looking into how this accident came about. This is a major tourist area, and there are helicopter flights like this along the Gold Coast all summer, hundreds of them, taking in the long sandy beaches there. So it's a major concern for the tourist industry. But the big worry is, of course, what happened to the pilot's line of sight, because they do depend on line of sight to make sure that these mid-air collisions don't happen. But clearly, in this case, something went seriously wrong.
Indeed. All right, Nicole, for now, thank you. All right, let's look at some of today's other headlines now. And face masks are back. As schools reopen this week, adults who feel unwell and go out are being advised to wear a mask. The Health Security Agency is also urging children to stay home if they feel unwell or have a fever to cut down on levels of flu, COVID and strep A. An American football player is in a critical condition after he had a heart attack or suffered cardiac arrest during a game. The Buffalo Bills player Damar Hamlin collided with another player in the first quarter. The game was suspended as an ambulance drove onto the field. He was given CPR before being taken to hospital for care. And the actor Jeremy Renner remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital after an accident with a snowplow. It's reported that he suffered blunt chest trauma and orthopaedic injuries and was in intensive care after undergoing surgery. An investigation has begun after 3 people and a dog died following a fire at a hotel in Scotland. Emergency services were called to the New County Hotel in Perth in what the fire service called a very complex incident. 11 people were treated at the scene. The Irish Prime Minister has admitted that mistakes were made on all sides in the handling of Brexit as it affected Northern Ireland. Leo Varadkar conceded that the Northern Ireland Protocol may have been a little bit too strict and says he would be flexible and reasonable in trying to solve the issues.
I'm sure we've all made mistakes in the handling of Brexit. There was no roadmap, no manual. It wasn't something that we expected would happen, and we've all done our best to deal with it. Again, look forward to travelling to Northern Ireland early in the new year, meeting with all the parties and reaching out to all parties and all communities in an effort to find a solution.
Now, tens of thousands of mourners have paid their respects to the former Pope Benedict XVI on the first day of him lying in state. Around 65,000 people, including the Italian Prime Minister, filed through St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. Now, the Brazilian football legend Pele's burial takes place this afternoon following 3 days of national mourning. Now, in the last 24 hours, thousands of people have paid their respects to the 82-year-old who died last week as his coffin lay in state at the home of his former club Santos. From there, our Jackie Beltrao sent us this.
The return of the King to his beloved Santos was welcomed with flags, flares and fans singing his name on Monday morning, as he was transported back to the pitch that made Pele a superstar, his home ground, Villa Belmiro. Placing him on the centre circle one last time was a little less smooth than his fans had been used to seeing in life. It was a traditional open casket as his family said their goodbyes, with his son Eugenio saying a quiet prayer. The first fans to file past his coffin had queued overnight, desperate not to miss their chance to reflect on an incredible life. First in the queue was Saulo, who travelled from rural São Paulo to be part of history.
When I saw him lying there, I wished it wasn't him. But that is the reality we are faced with today. There's no question that man was Edson Arantes do Nascimento, Pele the King. He will forever live in our hearts and memories for generations to come.
Thousands had the same idea, dressed in the iconic colours of Brazil or the black and white of Santos, some making the pilgrimage from all over the world.
I was born in St. Lucia originally, and growing up, when I played soccer, he was the first black person we recognized as one of the greatest, and everybody on the island wanted to be Pele. And when I moved to New York, I saw him play at the Cosmos in New York for Cosmos, together with Franz Beckenbauer.
She landed on a terrible day for Brazil and thought, well, I can't miss this. I've grown up with football, I love football, and yeah, I had to come here and share feel the sense of pride sharing this with everyone that's here.
Thank you, Pele, because he was the king of football.
And of course players he'd been inspiring for generations. Edson Arantes do Nascimento wasn't born here, he didn't die here, but for 19 seasons he put this place on the map, so much so that the Brazilian government made him an official national treasure and he couldn't play anywhere else. At 10 o'clock, he'll be taken along the beach in a procession through the streets of Santos, past his mother's house and then to his final resting place, just 200 metres away from the stadium, close enough to still hear the crowd roar. Jackie Beltrao, Sky News, Santos.
Well, it is just days now until the release of Prince Harry's memoir. In clips from 2 television interviews, Harry said he wants his brother and father back, but that they have made absolutely no sign of willingness that they want to reconcile.
I want a family, not an institution. They feel as though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile. Every single time I've tried to do it privately, there have been briefings and leakings and planting of stories against me and my wife. And that correspondent will literally be spoon-fed information and write the story. And then at the bottom of it, they will say that they've reached out to Buckingham Palace for comment. But the whole story is Buckingham Palace commenting. So when we're being told for the last 6 years, we can't put a statement out to protect you, but you do it for other members of the family, there becomes a point when silence is betrayal.
Well, the new year is dominated by concerns about the NHS and rail strikes. Of course, joining us now is the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper. Mark Harper, Happy New Year to you.
Good morning, Happy New Year to you.
We're going to come on to the rail strikes, of course, in a moment, but I want to start with the A&E. I don't know if you've been watching our show this morning. We had a chap on called Matthew Simpson who talked about his wife, Teresa, who died waiting 16 hours at A&E. I mean, what do you say to a family like that who's had to wait all that time to get treated in our health service?
Well, look, I didn't see the package, but obviously my enormous sympathies are with that family, and that's clearly not an acceptable length of time for anybody to wait. And I recognise that the health service is under pressure this winter. That's why the government's made extra resources available, not actually just for the health service, but also, importantly, for social care, to make sure that people who are well enough to leave hospital are able to do so. We made extra resources available so that that help can get onto the front line, and that's what I know ministers are working very hard to do. So I accept it's tough at the moment because we're dealing with the results of the pandemic, high level of flu and the normal winter pressures on top of that. But that's why we've made those extra resources available.
Aren't helping families like Matthew Simpson's, and not helping those families. But you've seen reports, people having to wait 99 hours for treatment.
Yes, and one of the real issues is about making sure that people who are well enough to leave hospital are able to leave. That's why it's important that the health and social care systems are working together. That's why we made £500 million, £500 million available before Christmas, and that money is getting to local councils and local health services so they can work together to get the system unblocked, and that's what will then feed through into a faster response into emergency departments and a faster response for ambulances.
But when are people going to see that? Because it's not just that money. I mean, that money is very welcome, of course, everyone will say that, but this is years and years of underinvestment in the health service.
No, well, look, I don't agree with that. We put of extra money into the health service every single year, and there's record levels of investment into the health service in real terms. We've got thousands more doctors and thousands more nurses working in the health service.
You know, there are 130,000 vacancies in the health service. There are huge discrepancies in those figures.
Well, no, look, there are significantly more doctors and nurses working in the health service. We do think it's important to look at workforce in the long term. That's why the Chancellor set that out in the autumn statement, and that's why the health service is working on that long-term workforce plan at the moment, which will be published in the coming months.
OK, let's come on to your brief and the transport strikes. There was reporting before Christmas that ministers had got involved at the last minute and had put a block on a deal being signed between the union and the rail delivery groups. Is that true?
No, that absolutely isn't true. And in fact, since I became Transport Secretary a couple of months ago, I met all the union leaders. I tried to change the tone of the discussions, and I said that ministers would help facilitate the trade unions and the employers, that's the train operating companies and Network Rail, getting round the table. I made sure there was a new and improved offer that went to trade union members. That's why 2 of the unions have settled on Network Rail. The RMT recommended, though, sadly, that their members should reject that. But even so, 1/3 of their members wanted to accept it. So, look, I think in the new year, it's time for the RMT to get off the picket line, back round the negotiating table, and ministers will do what we can to facilitate them coming to a deal with the employers. I want to get these rail disputes sorted out for the benefit of the travelling public.
So there's no clause that's been inserted at the last minute about driver-only trains?
Look, driver-only train is not a new thing. They've been in place. They've been in place.
For the unions, it's always been a red line.
They've been in place since the 1990s. 55% of people that use trains are on services where there is driver-only operation. Workforce reform is important. We've got to get rid of some of these outdated working practices. So, for example, we can have a proper 7-day railway where the rail service isn't dependent on people being rostered to work on their days off. That doesn't deliver a good service for passengers. So we need modern railway. There's a fair and reasonable offer on the table, and I hope the RMT look to take it.
I mean, you know that the RMT say that they work 7 days a week and it's not an issue about rostering. They say that there's not enough staff as well, which is perhaps part of the problem on those Sundays when people aren't...
No, look, this is because there are days of the week when people don't have to work, they're not contracted to work, and the rail service depends on what's called rest day working, which is where people are rostered to work on their days off. And if they don't want to come to work, the trains companies find it very difficult to run those services. That's not a way to run a modern railway. We need a proper 7-day railway where people are rostered on each day and have to come to work on each day they're contracted to work, so that you can deliver better services for passengers. It's that sort of reform with a fair pay package that we want to see to resolve this dispute.
Has that been offered?
There has been a fair and reasonable offer on the table, which is comparable to what most people listening to this programme will have got across the economy. 2 trade unions accepted that offer from Network Rail. The RMT are holding out against it, and I hope they get back round the negotiating table and off the picket lines, and we can try and hammer out a deal between the employers and the trade unions.
They're saying they want to talk to you. They said they've had no contact for the past couple of weeks.
Well, no, look, they met the rail minister, so the employers, trade unions and the rail minister met before Christmas. The rail ministers continued to talk to them across the Christmas period, and we're looking to have more meetings set up next week. I'd much rather those meetings took place this week instead of strikes taking place, and that would be my message to the trade unions.
Why aren't they taking place this week, then?
Well, because the trade unions...
It's your gift to organise those meetings.
Because
surely.
the trade unions decided they wanted to go on strike this week, which is deeply unhelpful, damages the rail industry, damages the interests of the people that work in it. I want to see them back round the table, and we can try and hammer out a deal between the employers and the trade unions. That's what I want to see happen. That's what I'm doing, working really hard with the rail minister to try and sort out.
Is there going to be an increase in the offer to these striking workers in terms of their benefits?
Well, look, there's a fair and reasonable pay offer on the table. Look, there's not a bottomless pit of taxpayers' money here. The taxpayers put a huge amount of investment into the rail industry over the last few years when it was hit with a huge impact from the pandemic when people weren't travelling. And I think you've got to have an offer that's both fair to the people that work in the industry, but that's also fair to the taxpayer that's picking up the tab, and that's the balance that we're trying to strike.
I mean, just a broader thought about the government that you represent in Europe, seeing all this strike action. I mean, how does that feel, working in a government that has so many people within the public sector and the private sector out on strike because of the state of the economy and the way that they feel the country's being run?
Well, look, it's not a surprise at the moment, with inflation being very high. We're seeing high inflation, driven by the war in Ukraine, the high energy prices. It's not surprising that people are under pressure. That's why the government's tried to make reasonable pay offers in the public sector. That's why, for example, we've accepted the independent pay review bodies in the health service, for example, which was above the government's own affordability constraints, but we accepted that offer in full to try and give people a fair pay rise. But look, I accept things are difficult at the moment. We want to try and get inflation back under control. That's the way that will help everybody in the economy.
That's definitely the ambition. And do you accept that more can be done by government to try and get this resolved? People are asking questions about where the Prime Minister has been. People are asking questions about Parliament being recalled this week to try and resolve some of these issues.
Well, look, the Prime Minister's been working, I think, had a short break for Christmas Day. He's been working across the Christmas period. We put in place those offers before Christmas on pay. We've accepted the pay review body's recommendations in the health service, for example, and I think ministers are going to continue trying to do what we can to resolve these disputes. But as I said, it has to be fair both for the people that work in the public sector, but also for the taxpayer that has to meet those bills. And that's what the government's going to continue trying to do.
Now, you said you've not been able to speak to the RMT so far this week. You'd like to, but I'm going to be speaking to him in a little while's time. What would you want to say to Mick Lynch?
Well, look, I had a perfectly constructive meeting when I met Mick Lynch after I took on this job. I'd say, look, the rail minister's trying to get some more meetings sorted out next week. Let's get off the picket line. Let's get round the negotiating table. I made sure there was an improved offer that went to trade union members. Let's try and hammer out the detail. You get these disputes resolved round the negotiating table, not on the picket line. And that would be my message to Mr Lynch.
OK. Mark Harper, Transport Secretary.
Pleasure.
Good to speak to you.
Thank you
very much this morning. Well, listening to that was the head of the RMT, Mick Lynch, who is outside Euston Station. Mick Lynch, good morning to you. So you heard Mark Harper there. He says he wants you to get off the picket line and round the table.
Well, that's fine. I heard a bit of it. I'd go and meet him now if he wants, or he can come here and meet me and we can hammer some things out. What we keep hearing is the same stuff from the government across the sectors, that they want to facilitate an agreement, but they don't actually do anything. I met the rail minister on the 15th, along with the companies. We've heard nothing tangible since then. You hear a few warm words, and Mark Harper makes, he conducts himself in a pleasant way, in a good way, and that's fine. So what we need to hear now from the government is exactly what it is they're going to propose to us. At the moment, they got themselves into a position before Christmas where we were making progress with the train operating companies. And on one Sunday afternoon before a set of strike action, they decided to torpedo those talks by putting in conditions in the documentation that they know that we and the other unions can never accept. So that was a deliberate strategy which frustrated the train operating company executives the most senior people in the industry are as frustrated as we are that the government will not facilitate a settlement, and indeed is taking the opposite tack of undermining efforts to get a settlement. They know that we can't accept the current proposal, so we need to get a fresh set of elements in the equation so that we can work up some solutions rather than just put in some warm words. So as soon as Mark Harper and his team want to meet us, we'll be available.
OK, well, look, he said he wants to meet you this week, but you're on the picket line, so he says he's going to meet you next week. But on that specific point about torpedoing...
I'll meet him at 10 o'clock if he wants. I don't know to stay on this picket line all day.
Let me put the question to you first, Mr Lynch. Hold on, sorry 1 sec. On that particular point about the government torpedoing the negotiations, I put that to him just now. He said that that's just not true. They haven't done that.
Well, he's not telling you the truth, because we had a document with the train operating companies that did not include driver-only operation. It was taken away for approval in Whitehall at the DfT, and they inserted about 8 or 9 bullet points that completely undermined the negotiations. That was a direct intervention of government ministers. We know that to be true. And if he's saying that didn't happen, he's simply not telling you the whole truth.
Well, let me tell you what he did say then. He said that the driver-only train things is not really an issue. He said 50% of trains are operated driver-only anyway. Basically saying that that's a strawman argument that you guys are putting up.
But why did they insist that it go in the document then? 50% of the trains that don't run on that way, it's only 70% run without it. And most trains are operated in this country with guards on board. So they did insist on doing that. I had a document. I was in a meeting with the companies on a Sunday afternoon, out of hours, in order to work towards a settlement. On the Friday, the document didn't have those clauses in. And on the Sunday, the clauses were reintroduced. By the
as I said, as I said, that he denies that happened. Let's talk about where this goes from here.
He can deny it all he likes. It doesn't mean it's not true.
Let's talk about where this goes from here. Look, you're out on strike 4 days this week. I mean, what do you think you've achieved in terms of your strike action since you've been out since the summer?
Well, we brought this issue to the fore. What we've done is stop the companies imposing a 50% cut in maintenance schedule tasks, taking risks with railway safety. We've stopped them imposing mass redundancies on our members, and we've brought the issue of the lack of a square deal for working people in Britain to the front page of and the front of all the news bulletins in the country, and we've woken up working people to the fact that they're being ripped off, that they're underpaid and their conditions are under threat right across our economy and right across our society. So we've had a game changer really across this year, or across 2022, in terms of what working class people are prepared to put up with. And we've put the government and corporate Britain under pressure to give British workers a square deal and give them value for money for their labour.
I mean, do you get concerned, though, that you might, with all this disruption, it's the start of the new year, you're going to start alienating some of the public with these tactics?
Well, we don't want to alienate anyone. We want to run the railway service properly. We want a safe, affordable railway that's run in the interest of the people, rather than the profiteers, the private sector railway companies that made profit right through the COVID pandemic, and every day during these strikes they've made profits because the government is subsidising the strike. So we don't think we're losing public support. We're getting massive support from people online, in person, on our picket lines, and even when our members are at work on non-strike days, the travelling public is telling us they support us. They want a decent railway that's run in their interests, and they don't want this inaction from the government and profiteering from the private sector railway. So as soon as we can get a settlement and get the public back on the railway and back to work and using leisure facilities to go about their business, the better for us and the better for them.
Yeah, Mick Lynch, I mean, on public support, Ipsos did some polling that says that there was less support for the strikes in December than there was in October, so it does seem to be going down a little bit, but we'll just leave that there for now. I mean, look, there's a payoff on the table, isn't there? There's an offer for conditions as well. What more do you want to see in terms of the offer? Because as the Transport Secretary was just saying there, that's there for you guys. What more do you want to see from them?
Well, the Network Rail offer, there are two different offers on the table. The Network Rail offer was rejected by our members because of the conditions that are on it. It's not a terribly high value pay offer, so there's got to be an improvement on the pay we're looking for, and we're looking for an agreement on our conditions, and we're looking for an agreement on job security. All of that is achievable in the next few days. The companies know what they need to do, and they know what we could accept because they're experienced people. It's the government that is stopping this happen. Now, I hope Mark Harper and Hugh Merriman can move this forward in the next few days so that we can end this dispute, that we can put a set of proposals to our members in referendums that they can support. But at the minute, that's simply not there. Our proposals and our needs are quite modest from this dispute. And if we can get towards a settlement, the happier we will be and our members can get back to work.
You said an agreement on job security. I mean, you've got an agreement until 2025 on no compulsory redundancies. You want it to go further than that?
That's not particularly the issue, the length of the deal with Network Rail. It's what we've got to do. We have to accept a 50% cut in maintenance schedules tasks on the railway. The company wants to introduce risk-based maintenance rather than planned preventative maintenance. We think that's unsafe for the public. We think it's unsafe for our people. And it's not the way to run our railway on a more riskier basis than it is. There's also disruption to their working lives, and there are thousands of job cuts on the table. So we need a settlement that addresses all of the issues and not just one element. So if we can get that, we can move this forward as quickly as we can.
And look, there are talks coming, as we've heard, and you said you wanted to have talks with Mr Harper today. If you don't get what you want in these next round of talks, are you going to step up this action?
Well, we've got a mandate that runs through to May, and we would ballot again if we haven't got a settlement. We don't want to have to do that. We want to get our members back to work. So the quicker we can get that, the better. But we have a mandate for industrial action that runs on all through the winter and all through the spring. And our members have voted for industrial action twice, and our Network Rail members have voted to turn down the proposals that are on the table. So we need an improvement in the offer so that we can get this thing sorted out.
And if you don't get it, what, more days a week out? You're out 4 days this week. Is it going to be 7 days? I mean, where do you take this to?
We've got no action. We've got no action on the stocks at the moment. We will review that next week when our members are back at work, and we'll consult our representatives around the country, and we'll decide what the next steps are after that. In the meantime, I hope we can get these discussions on. If the government is saying to me they want to speak to us as quickly as possible, we'll deal with that before we set down any more industrial action. But we need to get tangible improvements on what's being proposed.
Yeah, you've made that point, Mr Lynch, but I mean, passengers who have been disrupted on their commute back into work this week, people trying to get around the country to see family and stuff, they'd like to try and know what might be coming in the next couple of weeks from railway workers who are on strike. You're not going to tell us where you might take this action. You're already out for 4 days, as I said.
Well, we haven't got a schedule of further industrial action at the moment. What we do is we put down a schedule of industrial action. We review what that's done, where the talks are, and what our members feel about the action that's taken. So after this action that finishes on Saturday, we'll review that early next week, along with any progress in the talks that Mr Harper has indicated he wants to achieve, and we'll see what needs to be done. We don't have a schedule set out 6 months in advance. We take it in stages, and we'll do that when we review where the dispute is next week, when this phase is concluded.
All right, Mick Lynch from the RMT, do appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring in our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, who's with us now. Tamara, good morning to you. Happy New Year, of course. So, look, an accusation there from Mick Lynch that Mark Harper was lying. What do you make of that?
That's right. Well, look, a new year dominated by strikes. We've got rail strikes every day this week, either by the RMT or by the drivers' union, ASLEF. And although when Mark Harper became Transport Secretary just a few weeks ago, he said that he wanted a grown-up and good faith approach, and that was the way he said to get a deal. He said a deal was a possibility, and this was the way to do it, rather than the combative approach of his predecessor, Grant Shapps. It doesn't look like they are getting very far. Both sides very entrenched, with now Mick Lynch accusing Mark Harper of lying. He says the government are interfering and preventing, he says, Network Rail and the train operating companies from doing a better deal on pay and also on conditions, something that the Transport Secretary says isn't true. So it looks like they've got this mandate for another few months. It looks like there's a very real possibility of more and more strikes on the railways until the RMT feel they've got a deal that their members can agree to. They got a very big turnout and a big vote to reject the latest deal from Network Rail in December, which was for a 5% increase last year, 4% this year. But their big concern is changes to some of the working practices, which the government say is inevitable. And they say that the longer this goes on, the more people will be put off taking the trains and it won't seem like a viable option for them. So digging in there, and I think Tory MPs are very much being geared up for legislation coming for Parliament at some point in the next few weeks to ensure minimum service levels, to force not just the rail networks, but potentially parts of the NHS as well, to provide a minimum service level. I think there is a difference, though, in how MPs regard the rail strikes. Tory MPs have no sympathy with the rail unions, and how they regard these huge pressures in the NHS. And there's going to be NHS strikes later this month. I think a lot of them are very worried about that.
OK, Tamara, for now, thank you very much for that. All right, let's take a quick look at the front pages of the morning's newspapers now. And we'll start with the Times. Millions will shun trains forever is the front page of that paper. They say a generation of passengers will be put off train travel due to the recent strikes. The Guardian reports that the NHS faces 3 months of turmoil amid long waits and staff shortages. The Mirror says that the future of the health service is on a knife edge, while the Daily Mail looks at comments made by Prince Harry about the royal family ahead of the release of the first part of his memoirs next week. Its headline, Harry, I'd like my father and brother back. The Telegraph also leads with the interview and reports Prince Harry's claims that the King and Prince of Wales are unwilling to reconcile. Well, The Sun says that Prince Harry has slated his family again. Well, to the United States now, and President Biden is facing renewed pressure over the contents of a laptop that belonged to his son, Hunter. The president's Republican opponents have pledged to use the new session of Congress, which begins tomorrow, to investigate allegations around his involvement in his son's business affairs. President Biden insists that he had no knowledge of his son's business dealings. Our US correspondent, James Matthews, reports.
This is a story of what the computer repairman saw, and of questions it asks around secrecy and a sitting president.
He kind of sarcastically said, Biden, like kind of expecting me to know who he was.
John Paul McIsaac was handed a laptop for repair by Hunter Biden, son of Joe, in the months before the 2020 election. John Paul, who's visually impaired, showed us some of the content he kept. The addiction struggles of the president's son are well documented, but it's not images of drug taking or self-made pornography that's raising questions, as much as the email traffic.
The announcement of my guy's upcoming travels. Now, my guy, Hunter refers to his father as my guy, or the chairman, or the big guy.
Emails appear to suggest that Biden Jr. was used for access to Biden Sr. when he was vice president and his son was on the board of a Ukrainian energy company.
Why did he lie to the American people? Because he was fully aware of his son's business dealings. He was a tool of those dealings.
It's a computer repair shop that 2 years ago was the starting point for a story that had the look of a pre-election scandal. It was reported by the New York Post, but the tale that emerged from Wilmington, Delaware, hometown of the Bidens, didn't travel as far as it might have. John Paul McIsaac handed the laptop to the FBI. It warned Facebook and Twitter of the potential for Russian disinformation ahead of the election. The tech companies then restricted the laptop story on their platforms. Joe Biden's Republican opponents call it election suppression. The laptop and its contents had already triggered their plans for an investigation.
This evidence raises troubling questions about whether President Biden is a national security risk, and about whether he is compromised by foreign governments.
The story of the laptop that landed here comes with quotes from the president. Joe Biden was a candidate when it first came to light before the last election. He dismissed it then as disinformation, a Russian plant. He's also said that he's never had discussions with his son about any of his overseas business dealings. It's the story that stalks the Bidens still. Republicans now have a majority in the House of Representatives that opens the door to an investigation once closed. They saw injustice at a would-be scandal undersold. Now they see opportunity to sell it once more. James Matthews, Sky News, in Wilmington, Delaware.
Now, ski resorts across the Alps are being forced to turn away holiday makers because of a lack of snow. A spell of unseasonably warm weather has turned much of the snow to slush, particularly at some of the main resorts in France and western Switzerland. Temperatures in parts of Switzerland over the new year reached 20 degrees. And this weekend's Skiing World Cup event in the village of Adelboden will be run entirely on artificial snow. And with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, 20 degrees at Christmas in the Alps, let's have a look at the impact of climate change on the planet. As you can see, that's our climate change dashboard. On the right-hand side, you've got the UK's current power mix. 25% of our power is coming from gas right now, 0% from coal, which is good, and 52.5% from renewables, which is also excellent. On the top left, you can see how much warmer the Earth is now since 1880, and then the bottom left, you've got the total CO2 emissions since records began. Now, after the break, I'll be speaking to the former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell as the government surged to act over warnings that the pressure on the NHS is unbearable. Hello and welcome back. Now, the government has been warned that the pressure on the NHS is unbearable and intolerable and is facing calls to do more to help the service through its winter crisis. More than a dozen NHS trusts and ambulance services declared critical incidents over the festive period. The British Medical Association says that the government's political choices are leading to patients dying unnecessarily. Well, joining us now is the former Health Secretary and former Chair of the NHS Confederation, Stephen Dorrell. Stephen Dorrell, good to have you with us this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Intolerable, unbearable, the NHS is just about broken.
Well, I don't believe the NHS is broken, but it's clearly under huge pressure. It's not unusual, of course, for the health service to be under pressure at this time of year with people with flu. You can probably hear I've got it, flu and the COVID. And the normal pressures that come at this time of year. But I think it's also true that there are some steps the government now needs to take to relieve the pressure. It can't remove the pressure of high demand and stretched capacity, but there are some things it can do that will improve the situation. First of all, it can address the pay disputes. It's going to get worse during January if we've got pay disputes going on in the background. And the second is the thing that people don't often think about when they think about pressures in A&E departments, is that it is possible for the government to intervene quickly to improve the position in social care. And if you can support people in the community outside the hospital system, you relieve the pressures within the hospital system.
OK, Stephen, so let's go through both of those things. And first, let's start with social care. You may have heard the Minister, Mark Harper, saying that more money is going into the health service, specifically into social care, to try and alleviate those pressures. You said the government can do something quickly. What could they do?
Well, it is about money. It's also about ensuring that there are proper arrangements in place locally to join up the health and social care system. Anybody who's experience of the health and social care system knows that there are repeated incidents, repeated occasions when the different parts of health and social care don't work properly together. And so joining them up and providing more money for social care is actually the quickest single thing the government can do to relieve the pressure on A&E departments and emergency wards in hospitals.
And you also said address the pay dispute. Are you expecting the government to meet the pay demands of the RCN?
Well, the RCN themselves have said that they're looking for a negotiation. They've put a request on the table and then said they want to negotiate. It's the Secretary of State who's refusing to meet them to talk about pay. They'll talk about, the Secretary of State says he'll talk about everything except pay. What are the union leaders supposed to do when their members see that their representatives can talk about everything except the thing that their members want to see addressed?
And of course, you know, Stephen Dorrell, that pay is a huge part of this, but also its conditions. It's just the simple numbers of people who are on the wards. Oftentimes, safe staffing is how the RCN put it. I mean, how do you address that in the near term?
Well, the answer is there's a staffing issue around doctors and nurses right around the world, actually. There's a global shortage of people with the necessary skills as doctors and nurses and paramedics. So there's no magic wand that can be waved. But what you can do is treat the workforce that you've got in the wards, in the hospitals and in the community, treat them now properly. The problem at the moment is that people are leaving the health and social care system because they don't feel they're being treated properly. That is an issue the government can address quickly.
Yesterday I spoke to Matthew Taylor, who said that it's been those austerity years, chronic underfunding in the NHS that's led up to this point that we find ourselves at now. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's always true that if you've got more money, you can do more. I agree with that. The part of the system where I think the funding pressures have been greatest is the social care system we were discussing a moment ago. And what's happened over quite a prolonged period is that social care arrangement, the structures of social care have been withdrawn from cases that would previously have benefited from it. The result is those people come into hospital or they present at the GPs and the primary care system. They rely on the healthcare system when they actually didn't need to if they'd been properly supported in the community.
And Stephen Dorrell, I mean, I didn't want to come back to this, but you do keep mentioning fixing social care. I just want to get some more detail of what that actually looks like. You say get people out of hospital. There's 12,000 people can be discharged from hospital right now, as I understand it. They will go from hospital to where?
Well, each case will be different. Can I just pick up the point that there are 12,000 delayed discharges in the jargon in the health service, people who are in hospital who didn't need to be there. It's worth remembering that for every case of somebody who could be discharged from hospital, there are 4 cases of people who are avoidable admissions, people who should never have been in hospital in the first place. So if you address social care, that means ensuring that you've got funding for social workers to support people at home, for care visits to support people in the home. It also means ensuring that where people could be properly looked after in a residential care home or a nursing home, that is both better for the individual and also, as it happens, lower cost to the exchequer. So if you support those services, you end up with fewer people in hospital, but also fewer people relying on the NHS community services, including primary care and GP services.
So it comes back again, doesn't it, to funding and staffing, more money for the facilities and more money for social workers?
It does come back to staffing, but staffing and money, yes, it does. But there's always a tendency to look at the part of the system where the pressures are most acute and most obvious, which is in A&E departments and emergency admissions in hospital. Actually, the root cause of many of those admissions, delayed discharges, cases arriving in hospital is inadequate support in the community. You can deliver better care at lower cost if you address the questions of social care, which is that if you look across health and social care as a single system, it's actually social care that has taken the lion's share of the spending pressures over the last 15 years.
OK, Stephen Dorrell, former Health Secretary, really good to speak to you this morning. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.